Oh, I guess this is it. Doesn't have anything like an announcer. You guys don't go ahead and splice in. You have somebody come up and announce and say, here he is, and the band plays or something. Yeah. At least some stock footage of the old Jose Mellis band from the Tonight Show playing something. No? Good. I thought, since some of you are interested, we'd press on with this kind of electric sociology. Covering several areas tonight, touching upon them at least. To begin with, let me quote, Man is born free and everywhere is in chains. This is normally attributed to Rousseau, as some of you may know, but I feel it incumbent upon me to point out to you that he stole it from Attila's third wife. A little known fact, but what isn't in today's market. But at any rate, let us press on to the revolutionist electric translation and expansion thereof. The man is born free and everywhere is in chains. I'm using, as you might suspect, at least in the beginning, the material springboard of politics tonight. As always, from a more New World view, more revolutionist, manifold view, that idea that has been around a long time, and the quote, not to take any credit away from Monsieur Rousseau, has a particular ring to it, and people do continue to quote it. Man is born free, and everywhere is in chains. It is both a pertinent, telling, weighty, heavy, right-on city statement and sentiment. And it is as true as any other statement, and yet it is as full of cheese as a bunch of Swiss holes. So let me give you our kind of translation and expansion on it. Men were, you make that slash, born into primary slavery. That is slavery, captivity to all primary needs. And they were held fast, were/are, to varying degrees according to where your nervous system is attuned, where your particular place is in the city. Being captive, being a slave, born into slavery, not free, but born into primary slavery. For the time being, let's say were, and assume that most of you are ordinary bourgeoisie, middle class, city dwellers, and we'll say were, but do understand, as always, are is still operational, A-R-E, because some of this still operates in you, as you fully well know. I know some of you pass for being civilized and a haircut and a shirt on, but some of you I know personally, and some of you that I don't know personally, all I got to do is look at you. And I know that in your spare time, under those clothes, none of that haircut, are, not were, is still operational. That is, lots of you are still undercover beast. Attila's on your own, I know that. Just remember that yourself. But last, for the sake of keeping this one sentence tonight within the realms of 55 minutes with at least a few commas instead of having to drag it in to the next taping, so I don't have to keep saying it, we'll say were. We'll talk in the past tense, remembering that time, past, is still somewhere. And you remember where it is. Read my bush. Right. The past is still here. But back to what we were talking about. Men were born, not free, and everywhere are now found in chains. Men were born into absolute slavery to primary emotions and drives. That is, they were held absolutely fast. Piece of drama. Held fast to the immediate pressing needs of survival. So consider the good old picture of our caveman progenitors, just for our cartoon allegory. But picture that. If you were born then, or if you were born now in such a place that you were uncivilized, that you were still as close to being a feral representative of Homo sapien as possible, that you were in fact forced each day to get up and wander seeking food. That explains it all. You don't have to dream much more. If you were born in such a place, if you were born in the middle of the outback in Australia, let us say, and for some reason, well, let's say stupidity to make it easy, for some reason you never wandered out far enough to ever get into Sydney and to ever see the Opera House and have a good time. So there you are, even in today's world, and each day you get up and you have got to move to find food. There is no 7-Eleven, there is no Safeway down the street. It's on that basis. Do you understand? Quite simply, you are born into primary slavery. I mean, nobody's going to, if anybody jumped out of the bushes, me, and say, have you ever heard this phrase, men are born free and everywhere in chains? And you'd say no, and I said, well, what it says, what they're attempting to say, we come from a different place. And let me give you right quick, they're attempting to say that men are naturally free creatures and in some way they get enslaved. Getting around to the inference, if he didn't know what it was, which he wouldn't, of course, is governmental, that the institutions of man and certain uncouth individuals attempt to take over control. And so it's unnatural. The natural state is freedom. Do you understand any of that? You or this person would go, you know, how long is these questions going to take? I got to find something to eat. Plus the sun's going down. I got to find a place. I can't sleep out here in the desert all night. I've got to find a gully somewhere. I got to find some kind of bushes to cover myself up. But if I tried to tell him what freedom is, just freedom's doing anything you want to, would he not take it as being insanity? It would almost be impossible for me to explain it, but if I say what it means is you don't have to do anything. Now remember, he's living there in the immediate grasp of survival. The question each day. And if I said it means you can do anything you want to say the very least, I'd then have to give him the word insane. So he'd say, yeah, you're insane. The idea is insane because I can't do what I want to unless you're going to say what I want to stay alive. And to stay alive, I don't get up in the morning and think, what'll I do now? I know what I'll do. I got no choice. On that level, we'll still say were, but remember it's were/are, that men were not born free. That initially men were born in the immediate grasp of primary needs, primary emotions, primary drives, simply to survive. But more or less, I think you can all see that more or less, in any way it's describable, you people, contemporary men, almost everybody on this planet, contemporary civilized men, are freed from that. You are not. Now, I know you have to go to work, you think, but we've been through this before. All you've got to do is be able to take a pretty sang-froid view, and you can realize right here, 1990, this part of the world and many other parts of the civilized world, you can almost do nothing and live. Now, you may have to go down and pick up your welfare check, collect unemployment. You may have to go sign up to some government program. You may have to stay on the move. You have to walk from one homeless shelter. I don't know how they go in your city, but they may only let you stay in a place for a week, and they may drive you out in the daytime, so you got to go out in the park and wander around and come back. So there is that small kind of moving requirement to go pick up your free food or your check or to go from here to there. But insofar as you being held in the grasp of the immediate need to survive, no, you simply do not. So on that basis of my artificial, arbitrary division into primary and secondary affairs and emotions and needs, you are, by and large, more or less freed from the immediate press of primary needs. You are not struggling each day, even over a lifetime. If you had any sense at all, just walking around city sense, you are not pressed to look after survival. If you just got an IQ of somewhere around 3 digits, and you just can wander around and find your way here and there, and your feet's good enough that if you don't have car fare, subway fare, to walk a few blocks, you can live. So the idea of primary needs being your form of slavery is no longer true. Not for the sake of this kind of electric sociological vista. What you're dealing with now is tied to the energy scheme of life itself, is you are tied into furnishing energy at a secondary level, and so you are newly chained. It is a new form of captivity that has never been specified, analyzed, detailed in this way. There are so many examples, so many places to go with pointing out to get you to where you can start seeing it for yourself, those kinds of secondary activities that are a new form of slavery. And I'm saying slavery, of course, in real large writ and pseudo-facetious but useful quotation marks, because it is not any form of political, social, personal slavery. It is simply a new level, but I can refer you back to, surely, what you saw when I was describing primary slavery, that if indeed you were forced each day to stay on the move, that you had to get up each day and you had no more assurance of being able to live out that day with enough food, enough shelter, than you did the previous day. That it's all an itinerant existence. Everything that furnishes you any nourishment is ephemeral. You find a bush today with enough berries to keep you alive, and that's it. Tomorrow, there's no assurance you'll find a bush. You find a place, a cave that takes you out of the lightning and the cold and the wind of the night, but tomorrow you can't stay there because you've eaten all the berries within sight, within immediate walking distance, so you've got to keep moving. So tomorrow you don't know what will happen. So looking at that as being a form of slavery to your own welfare, to your own continued existence, there is a new kind of slavery that, even though you are freed from that kind, more or less, by and large, if you are civilized, there is a new form of slavery that is better described now as being a secondary form. And the examples, all you got to do is look. Anywhere you look, there is an example. But I was going to point out, rather than survival, now the kind of secondary slaveries you could look at, for instance, as paying off the mortgage on a real large house, paying off the payments on a car that's more than just basic transportation, paying off, keeping up with the alimony for your first 2 wives, that sort of thing. But I was going to give you what is surely the primo example today, and that is government. Because that, in fact, of course, is what Rousseau was referring to about men are, even though born free, are everywhere in chains. Government is even more than it was in Roman and Grecian times. Government is now, I hate to give my hand away, but government is almost a secondary affair. Now, many people take the idea of government, which is just a human institution, a collection of people. It is a larger need being served by life over collecting up individual cells and turning them into a liver, instead of just some random blood, skin cells here and there. But people now look upon government in such a way, without them analyzing it in these words, as almost a hobby. If you consider, if you turn on the news, if you read much, if you listen to people discuss things, I would suggest that in the civilized world today, over 50% of human conversation, at least 50% of the news and periodicals, and I don't mean magazines that just say the news magazine, but in some way is connected with the government. And from another view, part of life's body continues to do this right until today. And many times the parts of life's body I'm referring to are quite educated, sophisticated, city people. And of course, many of the plebeians look upon government as being man's supreme folly. The living example of inefficiency, self-defeating plans, self-destructive activities, the general denouncement, and in many cases hatred of the bureaucracy that is inherent in government. That in our day and time, you're working, I think the last figures is like the first 3.5 months of every year. Not a cent you make, not a cent of your gross income is yours for the first 3.5 months of the year. In fact, we're taping this in May. It's just been the last 4 or 5 weeks that you're actually getting any money this year. The rest of it went for the government. And well, maybe I'll get into some more than specific examples, but everyone has got wired into your system. Probably your own caustic, sarcastic attitudes like, boy, I worked 3.5 months for the government, and what do they do? I don't even want to talk about it. But governments are like an institutional piling to mortal civilizations. They could be called other things, but just governments. Let's just leave it at that, and you can take it in its widest sense. And it's within this structure more and more, like I said, to the point now that the majority of human conversation is about some form of government. And if you can follow that, then I would point out, what I'm going to try to get you to see, that within the structure of government is where men are being forced to toil. And you, of course, you don't have to work for the government, but you are being forced into a new kind of slavery that is tied directly to the institutional activity in the city, best described, most aptly described, as governmental. I could point out some other areas. They're all, or most of them are related. I could point out the judicial system. I could point out the educational system, healthcare system, the business world, the financial world. And I could even get into more specific areas that are still burning issues of our day, like gun control and abortion. All of these would not be any concern did man not have government. If in some way I could twist reality and we were more than primary creatures, we were more than beast, and we were living and we lived in some way that we were not killing one another, and we were just living still sort of as ramblers, farmers, herdsmen, still in Rousseau's idea of a certain kind of more primordial freedom, and still rather intelligent, could talk, and had no government, if we could imagine that. If that were true, then what I want you to see is we would have no judicial system. There'd be no laws. There may be a few like don't kill each other. If you do, the rest of us will jump on you and kill you. And so there could be some rules, but as far as there being a judicial system, there'd be none. There'd be no educational system. There'd be no financial world. There'd be no Wall Street, or in their case, I guess, a wall path. There would be no religion. I mean, there'd be fear and superstition, but there'd be no organized religions without a government first. There would certainly be no question about gun control or pro-life going on. You have got to have government. You have got to have people get together and just, I'm not going to go into it because you know this is not politics, it's not political science, but they've got to get together and a thing come out that's just generally called government. By anybody's definition, I don't care. There has got to be that. But notice how it is many, many times, and not just by people who's had their toes stepped on by the IRS, but it has historically been denounced by many intelligent people, people in the arts and literature and philosophy, roundly kicked about and criticized that, boy, government obviously has some place, and I'm not sure we could do without it. And I'm giving rough quotes to stuff 4,000 years ago. But they're saying, look at what's happened. Look at the gross inefficiency. Look how we get together and try to do some good and all pitch in our money. And what do? The government squanders it. As though the government were an institution. As though the government were a Harvard, were a Catholic church, and that the institution was something other than people. It's nothing other than people. But it is denounced as though it were something aside from its participants. And it is roundly denounced. Even by those in government, if it's not roundly denounced, which of course they've got to walk a certain line, at least they lose their phony baloney jobs themselves. But even within the ranks of government, no one will unabashedly, unconditionally defend any government, even those in it. Never. Because it always seems to, at least to minimal degrees, always working at cross purposes. It attempts to wage war, and it steps on its own pecker. Some great group, some nation will do it. They attempt to reform the economy, and they break everybody. Everybody's soon out eating grub worms and sucking on oak bark. They attempt to set up some kind of social reforms, and they end up killing half their population. All right, that always seems to be true. But what we're getting at is not any sort of critique of governments. It is directly tied to a verbal description, at least, of this new kind of slavery, the secondary captivity, because government can now be seen, or you should be able to think about it on your own, as the umbrella chains of a new kind of captivity. Consider, it got a reaction, but it's more than the fiscal elements involved, that you're working 3.5 months every year to pay taxes. It's just gone. And we can certainly say, well, it goes to local, and it goes to national, and it keeps the streets paved, and it keeps the traffic lights on, and at least we got the fire department. But if you really sit and think about it, you think, do I want to work 3.5 months for what I seem to get out of this? Many, many people, and not just rebels and not just would-be hermits, many people would say no. Because sure, there's a place for government, but my God, I am working 1/4 of my life. And what am I getting? You mean the big deal is that the streets are sort of paved? That sometimes the traffic lights work? I did have a break-in at my house. I called the police. And they said, well, we're busy. Would you just give us a report over the phone? They broke in my house. That sort of thing. I got killed, and they asked me to send in a report by mail. The only reason I'm laying on this is building up to the punchline, is that it is quite easy, without being particularly sardonic or sarcastic, to find great, severe fault with this institution of government and everything within it, and everything that is at least indirectly manifested thereby, such as education, the judicial system, the financial world, and etc. It seems to be the calming, it seems to be the directing, it seems to be the civilizing general structure that holds modern man together, civilized people. And yet no one can unconditionally defend it as being efficient, knowing what it's doing, serving any real purpose other than just minimally to maybe fill up some of the potholes, maybe have some of the traffic lights work and all that. But I'm working 1/4 of my life, day in and day out, for that. Something's wrong. Friends, if I may call you friends, nothing is wrong. See, you have, through life's own growth, you have slipped out of primary slavery. That is, to the immediate necessity to survive. But these ideas about freedom, they are in the same category, the Easter Bunny. If men were left to themselves, I got to twist reality now, but those of you, enough of you should be able to hear it. If men in some way could be left to themselves, if there were such a thing as, quote, freedom, men were left to themselves, that in some way, that they would just wander off on their own and develop, pursue, like their own personal, secondary interests and affairs. They would not be properly serving life's need for transformers, conductors, and fuel. Thus, from one way that you could very aptly look at it, what takes place in ordinary civilized life, specifically, you might keep in mind government, but in ordinary civilized life, you could look at oft times as being apparently useless toil, futile work. But it all has to do with ordinary people being forced to, apparently, struggle for the betterment of some greater institution. That they are apparently being driven, forced, if they're wired up to think of it in such a way, such as by taxes, forced to toil for some greater power, the government. At least 3.5 months of the year, you work for the government, even if you work for your uncle in the drainage business. For the first 3.5 months of the year, you work for a greater power. You got no choice. You work for it. You can denounce it, you can badmouth it, you can do satirical skits about it, or you can just fume about it. But unless you're going to risk its wrath, for the first 3.5 months, you work for this greater power. It is through necessity for life. All these ideas about freedom, the kinds of philosophical questions and debates that have gone on about the man being subservient to the will of the state and all such as that, they are simply misseen. They are misnamed. Because all of this, all such discussions, such as the question of the power of the state, the question of whether man's free, whether he was born free and now he's in chains because of institutional pressures, because of the great, quote, government, the nefarious government, and all of its underlings, religions, bureaucracies. All of that is not actually questions and debates regarding freedom, much less political freedom. They're all matters, what's being discussed, what's being known, is a matter of energy efficiency. That's the beginning and that's the end of it. That's the beginning and end of politics. That's the beginning and end of all institutional life of man. But all the questions as to whether individual men have freedom, whether they had some and lost it, whether they have less than they did yesterday, whether they could get more, whether they need more, who's keeping them from having it, that is busy work. You are looking in the wrong place to try and figure these 3.5 months that you're working for the government each year as being, futile toil, wasted labor. Don't look there. Look where I just pointed out. That all of the apparent concerns over it, that is the ultimate wasted labor. Well, other than the fact, of course, that it's necessary and that life needs it. Consider specifically, there may be, for those of you that still feel a little hanging around by your fingernails, there may be a more appropriate punchline for you personally somewhere before we get through. But consider, off to the side again, quite specifically in the area of just everyday life, that you do not work personally for the government, you're not a budding anarchist, you're just a regular fellow. But notice specifically how the nervous system of quite ordinary folks bemoan bureaucracy. Always have. Thousands of years ago, complaining about it, right up until the day of the difficulties of going down and getting your welfare check. To go down and renew your driver's license. To even go into the lobby, perhaps, of your local city hall and even find out where you get your driver's license renewed. From a place that says information. And you find yourself over there for 20 minutes dealing with several people, trying to find out where you get your driver's license renewed. Surely I do not have to lay much more on these kind of examples. I just want you to know it's nothing new, and it has nothing to do with whether you live in the borough of Manhattan, whether you live in Fulton County or Orange County, whether you live in Duval County. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter if you live in Brussels, in Italy. Well, it might in Italy, but well, it's supposed to be even more fun there. But and it doesn't matter whether you're alive now or whether you were alive in Greece during the heyday. You start dealing with institutions. You start dealing with bureaucracy. And remember, even in the underlings, it doesn't have to be just at City Hall, because you would not have an educational system without government in a City Hall. You go over and you try to find out something about how to take a course in school, find out how to transfer your child from one school to another. Or you go to your judicial system and find out how to bring a complaint against another citizen, how to defend your rights. You go in with what seems to be the attempt to go from here to there very directly. Even a question to start with. I have a question that has to do with the law, with the government. And they say yes. And you ask the question, and you know, or you should know by now, it was a question that should take, you thought, 30 seconds for you to ask it and be a reply. But if you had your wits about you, you made arrangements at work to take half a day off. So what is it? Is it some psychological quirk in man? Is it some evil, unknown plot? Is the Prince of Darkness still alive? And instead of operating the franchise at the core of the earth known as before as Hades, is he now the government? Is that the ultimate? Let's stick it to him. Not if you are in the field of electric sociology, because all of this is quite clear. It's not electronic sociology, by the way. For any of you who got in here by mistake, that's down the hall. Not far from Sarcasm 101. This is electric sociology. Bureaucracy I was using, still in the full sense. And you could find the bureaucracy, by the way, in the church. So I have to go through that you go and you ask the minister, the priest, the rabbi, listen, I have this important moral question. There's something really plaguing my soul. I contributed some money to help pay for this new wing. Oh, yes, we remember that. Well, I felt so bad, I want to tell you, that money I embezzled from my company last year. What should I do? And they have to say, look, can we get back with you? Or why don't you pray? Why don't you meditate about it, and I'll meditate about it, but don't say anything until we decide. At any rate, it seems like it's always, if I have to, bureaucracy. That you are more and more, if you're outside the gatherer, wandering shepherd scenario about living by yourself. If you're not doing that, then you're living in what, as you know, we've been calling the city. And if you're living in the city, by the definition of it, by the operational, spatial definition of you living in the city, you are not a hermit. You are not a freelance wanderer. You're not a man who's letting the hairs grow out of his ears down to his shoulders and wearing wild berries in his hair and communing with nature. If you're living in the city, you're going to deal with the bureaucracy. That is, you're going to live and deal with, you must, if you're trying your best to be a city hermit. That is not work. You have got to deal with the bureaucracy to go get your free cheese, to get your welfare checks, which I'm sure can drive you crazy. So there's no escaping bureaucracy, educational, judicial. I'm still lumping it under the government. You're working 3.5 months, a year for the bureaucracy. You cannot move. You cannot go open a business without bureaucracy. In some cases, it's dangerous to say certain things to certain people unless you check with the bureaucracy. That is, you better check with an attorney to find out if what you're about to say is slander, whether you could lose everything you worked for in the city after paying off all those ungodly taxes. And now, 1 or 2 words to the wrong person at the wrong time, a few months, well, that's might as well drag out more bureaucracy. A few years later, in most judicial circuits, the case might get to court and you could lose everything you had. the house that the real fancy house, not just a cave somewhere to keep you well and dry, but this fancy house that you had a 30-year mortgage on. The first 20 years, of course, of which is only interest. None of this to give anybody the blues because you're getting sense. You know all this already. It's the electric sociological view. That you could lose all this stuff that in a sense you didn't need anyway. But you could lose it just by saying a few ill-appropriate words to the wrong party at the wrong time, and the laws of slander could take away that which you have at least been in debt for and paying so fast that would take Cassius Clay's breath away. So, there is no escaping dealing with the bureaucracy, and yet have I not given enough examples, and your own ordinary nervous system at that level should be as sarcastic enough already that you know you've got your own sad war stories of dealing with it. But the question then about, well, what in the hell is going on, or is it wrong, or why is it this way? Why doesn't it get any better? Why does it seem to get worse? People are not ordinarily. Man is not wired up and primed for what he is led to define and think of as being real free. The concept of real freedom is not part of man's wiring and chemically primed system. It is simply not. It is not, and many people talk about it and dream about it, and they get it down specifically as life keeps it in a reasonable corral of attempted explanations. They normally keep it in the area of political freedom and sometimes financial freedom. I wish I was rich enough to retire when I'm 40 so I wouldn't have to work and just play golf. But see, that's tied to the government still. It's still tied to the bureaucracy because, hell, I would be rich at the rate I'm going now if I had not spent. I'm 40 years old. I've been working 20 years, and so what's 1/4 of 20? The first 5 years of my life, the government took everything. That is, the first 3.5 months of this 20 years, you understand, relatively speaking. They have taken a good third or a fourth of everything I've ever made. So I could be now free were it not for those kind of political, via taxation, chains. And so people dream of being free, and it's always in some way a political kind of freedom. That I wish I was free to go around nude. I wish I was free to take as many wives as I wanted. I wish I was free to take on debts so somebody would give me credit and then go, pfft. And I wish I was free to tell everybody what I thought of them without being liable to the laws of slander. Now, people here and there are allowed to think such things, even write such things. But man, little m, covering the general scheme of things on this planet, even now and as they were, what we're talking about now, is not wired up, is not primed for freedom. He is primed for this. He is primed to talk about it. It would take a real intellectual subversive. It would take somebody living in a new world, intellectual. It would take a real revolutionist to be able to be actually free without going bonkers. Or at least without begging for his chains back. Because if you took an ordinary person, and you could absolutely turn them free, that they sort of fit the definition that I started out with, the little mention I had earlier, that they were just sort of freed from all responsibilities of any kind, and they could just develop, come up with, then pursue their own personal agenda, their own little hobbies. I don't care what the hell it is. Just do it. Nobody's going to bug you. That's it. If you did that to an ordinary person, they would be animal crackers within a few days or a few weeks. And they would, in essence, if they didn't go ahead and just go institutionally nuts and get put away so that, there's no question then of freedom anymore. I had enough of that. I am really crazy. Well, we'll lock you up. No, I'm really crazy. Okay, we'll put you in a straitjacket. Whew, thanks a lot. They will end up begging for their chains back. They will end up, yes, we're going to retire you early. Oh, great. 2 months later, the guy's back. Couldn't I come back to work part-time? Hey, I'll come back to work at half salary. Okay, no salary. Can I come back? That's just a crude example, but it happens. The human nervous system and the job it is performing as transformer, conductors, and fuel itself is not wired up for any sort of real freedom by anybody's definition. And yet it is wired up to continue to rail against, bemoan the fact, dream of having. That sentence even got too complicated for us. To decry the fact that it doesn't have freedom, and then to dream, to even say it's planning how to have more freedom. That is the name of the tune. Not to get it, because if it could happen, it would drive people crazy. It is simply not the nature of the way life is. And I was going to point out that bureaucracy, the full umbrella term of government, but the bureaucracy is the most efficient way. This is the greatest example. Just think of the worst thing, if I hadn't done it for you, my little Mayup example, of the worst ways that the government, local bureaucracies, the dunderheads that man these information booths or that are in charge of giving out welfare checks or giving you your new driver's license, where do they find these goddamn idiots? All right, think of the worst scenario, the worst thing you've ever been through, and then let me point out, you are face to face with efficiency on the hoof. The bureaucracy, this eternal frustration at a, quote, although you don't look at it this way, at a greater power for which you must toil, no matter who you think you're working for. Remember, it ain't your brother. It ain't your uncle there in the septic tank business. No. You can think that as long as you're at the city level. But as long as you are toiling, and as long as you are complaining, you are in the midst of energy efficiency. You can look upon, I was going to say, the kind of umbrella of government / bureaucracy. You could look at it really as kind of being it is like a trial. You could look at it as being a kind of even morass that people have to continually try and swim through. But what it does is churn energy. If I got this too complex, let me try to simplify one quick wrap up. In any way that you want to, any way you ever heard, but your own nervous system was, as everyone's is, was born in the city and raised there, and you have got to have your own sarcastic, if not well-founded complaints with all forms of bureaucracy. Dumb, too large to be efficient institutions of all kinds, which don't you lose sight of the fact that me using government and bureaucracy is everything. I could be calling this religion instead of government tonight. But the educational system, the judicial system, the financial world. But it is this feeling that blind or faceless bureaucracy. But what it is the larger power, the greater force that everybody works for. It's not relative to think, well, they push me around. They treat me this way when I go down to City Hall. I should go into politics. If I got elected to the City Council, or if I became President of the United States, the bureaucrats wouldn't push me around. You're crazy. Boy, if I was president, if I had some political power, then I wouldn't have to put up with this crowd. Well, all right, not this specific crowd. You'd be putting up with other crowd. Because it is not the bureaucracy. It is not the government. Nobody knows who they're working for except the revolutionists. I was going to say you could see it as a kind of real trial, that the kinds of feelings ordinary people have that, boy, going down to City Hall, trying to get the least little thing done is indeed like running a gauntlet of knives or being whipped with little teeny stinging cats of even 10 tails. It is just a kind of frustration in action. Why should I have to put up with this? Why cannot something be done about the dumb, faceless, unthinking, unmoving bureaucracy? You're talking about the city. You're talking about institutions. You're talking about life. You're talking about who you work for. because it is super efficient. All right. Does it not keep you busy? Does it not keep you enslaved? Now, if you're ordinary, you can go, well, all right, if you're going to say that, yeah, but I don't like it. I don't care whether you like it. I don't know what I asked. Does it not keep you enslaved? Well, I don't like that term. All right, how about, does it bugs you? Yeah. A lot? Well, a good bit. In fact, if the government wasn't so big, if the bureaucracy was not so invasive in my life, I wouldn't even put up with it. Oh. I assume that some of you understand this kind of conversation, imaginary between me and ordinary intelligence, could go on forever. And it would never see it. Because no explanation is satisfying to ordinary intelligence. It's not supposed to be. And so it would always feel like, well, I got one more millimeter of the plank. You know, you're trying to make me walk out here, but it's always got one more, just an inch. That no matter what I ask, ordinary intelligence can say, well, you know, I see what you're getting at, but, and it never gets to the end. It's not supposed to. And so it would never see that the bureaucracy is not inefficient, and it's always sure it is. And give an example, now I could say, well, look, I already gave you the example. That's not inefficiency. That is efficiency. All right, why do you say that? Let's assume that you have got to be kept in slavery. It's just now a new form of slavery. You, I'm looking at you, I'm talking to this imaginary person. You are not forced to get out and strip off berries, try and chase game day to day to live. Am I right? Yes, you're right. So you're not captive. You're not a slave to the immediate needs day by day of keeping body and soul and family alive. No, you're right. But now let's assume for a minute that you've got to be kept in slavery. Let's just assume that is some kind of science fiction idea. And the guy says, all right. So that won't do. Because you know, well, you can skip work. As well as you're doing down at the brokerage house, you could call in and tell them that you want to take a sabbatical for a couple of weeks, and they probably wouldn't say anything, the kind of money you've been bringing in. They say, yeah, you're right. So it's not that you've got to every day feed yourself and worry about where to live. No, you're right. But let's assume that you've got to be kept in slavery. And he said, okay, just for dialogue here, I will. And I said, all right, here's how it happens. Look how frustrating being civilized and sophisticated is. Just in all aspects. And the person said, oh, okay, I got you, yeah. And then if I was still dumb, I'd go, well. And they'd probably go, well, what? Well, don't you see? Don't you see that by this great frustration, by the, at least, let's use the example for a second mathematically of this alleged 3.5 months that you must work. Let's just say 3 months, make it easy. 3 months that you work every year to pay your taxes. That 3 months, first 3 months, forget it. You're as a slave. The government's getting every cent of that. That's the way it works out. Okay, he knows that. He reads time. So I said, all right. So you know you're in that much slavery. He says, yeah. But look at the rest of the slavery as being your complaints about this. Surely some of you see, because in ordinary intelligence say, wait a minute. You know, I almost fell for that. But what you're saying is I have complaints about something that should be fixed. Now, you can't call that slavery. No, maybe you could metaphorically in some way, but we're talking about something that is operating inefficiently. We're talking about something that's partially broken, and it needs to be fixed. And still, if I was dumb, I went, well. And he'd probably again go, well, what? You can't see that forget Con Edison and Pacific Gas and Light or Southern Bell or the Southern companies here. If you want to see power, if you want to see efficiency in the use and the movement of energy, what better than that? That the people involved with being the fuel and the conductors don't understand the nature of what's going on. Put to you another way, their complaints about what they think going on, you know, you're like your own internal Hoover Dam. While you're complaining about all this water that's rushing through me, all this water behind me, or it's too dirty, it's too warm, it's too cold. And every time you open your mouth, that is, every time you think, every time you react to this in that kind of way, it's as though you're opening slush gates, the water's flowing through, running the turbines, and you're producing energy. While bitching and raising hell. What could be more efficient? But what I want you to see, that there is a kind of non-political slavery that's new. That the idea of man is born free and is everywhere in chains, man is born in chains. The chains have changed. The appearance of what holds people into captivity has changed. And it is just absolutely faceless to them, because they take it as being a complaint. They take it as being inefficiency. Is why I use the example of government and bureaucracy, that the very specific things that seems to be the primary bane in modern man's existence, the government. Oh, okay, the government, parenthetically, the inefficiency thereof, the wastefulness thereof, that very thing is the new captivity. Since you are not forced through some more primary, more primitive slavery of having to get out and find berries and a place to live every day, you've got to be doing something. You can't be free. Not in the way people think. As I said, whether you agreed or saw it immediately or not, you'd go nuts if you're an ordinary person. You'd go nuts, plus life would be falling apart. The captivity now is not seen as captivity. In fact, people believe that they are more and more free. And the more you're in the modern world, let's use the United States and Western Europe, but the United States, here we stand doing this, is the bastion, the avant-garde of freedom. We have more political freedoms than anyone in the world. We have more financial freedoms. We have, relatively speaking, less of a tax burden than the other civilized, industrialized countries. That we are living in the freest place in the world. Right. But but still people struggle. Still people talk about, well, we're not free enough. We need to do this. But you're never free enough for one reason, because you're not free to start with. But as long as you think you're not free enough, the energy, the slush gates open, the turbines run, man serves the purpose. But it's no longer seen in those direct ways, I guess some of you saw, but back up a second, that let us say, staying right here, 1990 in the United States, you would say, well, I'm not a slave. Forget all the inconveniences and the tax burden that I do have. But I'm not a slave. I can move from place to place. I don't have to ask the government's permission. I can change jobs. I am free. More or less. I want to be freer. What's being discussed without people knowing it? 5,000 years ago, this afternoon. It's not a matter of political freedoms. It's not a matter of personal rights and privileges in the city. It's all misnamed. What's being discussed is energy efficiency. That's always it. And what it comes out and is manifested on the material level, such as, well, this group over here seems to have more freedom, politically, economically, and this group over here at another time or another place seems to have more or less. All you're dealing with is like now these kind of power nexuses that connect Con Ed, or the whole parts of New England, is now tied in to the parts of the power companies in the South, so they can just throw switches, and if New York starts draining off too much power in the middle of the summer, they can run into areas that are cooler out in Montana and run power over there. That's what we're talking about, and they don't know it. By saying, well, we have more political freedom in New York than we have in Montana. But just in case. They don't understand this, and we're running out of time. I guess some of you saw it, and I guess some of you did not get that. But now it just switched back and forth. And all these ideas, these discussions, political, economic, in the city of, well, this represents a certain kind of political freedom. It did in some period in history, or it does now, and compared to this other side, it's more or it's less. All they're discussing is energy efficiency. All they're talking about without knowing it is, well, here in New York, we're getting pushed. We need more locally produced energy. We need to build those new dams. We need to build new atomic power plants. And then here in Montana, well, we've got enough. We don't need any more. Well, we can shift some of it over here. They don't know it, but that's what's being talked about. Individuals do not know it. But when you're talking about, when you are driven to talk about ideas of, boy, I wish I was free, you're talking about energy efficiency. And if you're ordinary, you're talking about a dream of being insane. Because ordinary people are not primed and wired to do it. They could not handle it. It's not going to happen. So none of you have to worry. But if you were absolutely free, and just in the general way you think, just to do nothing but pursue what you wanted. I'm talking about fully now, that the institutions of the city no longer have any effect, no pertinence to you whatsoever. You'd be back in a short period of time saying, please, would you please chain me back up? It would take what we've been calling a real revolutionist to be able to actually be free, because what we're referring to as a real revolutionist here, it would have to be that you now have a new area within your own nervous system, within your own brain, wherein you can toil, travel inside, do your own work inside of your own intellect whilst laying under a palm tree. But the dreams of ordinary people that, boy, I wish I was free. I wish I was free financially. I wish I was free politically. I just wish the hell that life would leave me alone. Well, there's always... That's as close as they're going to get. Not to give anybody the blues, but I could point out again that from another view, that is why this kind of stuff is always, or oftentimes feels so strange. It is so unexpected. It is so unaccounted for. And it is, and I'll do my last quote for the night, it is really unnatural. Because it has to do with a kind of freedom. We're out of tape. I was going to tell you a handful tied around what we've been talking about, but I guess I'll save it for the next time we tape, unless they arrest us all. Put us all in chains, and of course refuse to accept any degrees in electric sociology, and thus having made us all waste our academic time. But assuming that doesn't happen, I'll see you next time out there.